Welcome to The Complete Works, an official podcast of FilmBook. The Complete Works is a podcast that delves film by film into the filmography of a Hollywood actor, director, writer, or composer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Complete Works Podcast, a film podcast brought to you by FilmBook. My name is Doug Hess. If you're tuning into the Complete Works Podcast for the first time, what I do on this podcast is discuss a specific movie from a film actor, actress, director, or composer's film career. I'm currently working my way through Christopher Nolan's career, and in this episode of the Complete Works Podcast, I'll be discussing the film Tenet. Find more Complete Works Podcast episodes on FilmBook, that's film-book.com, by using the search term The Complete Works. If you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or another podcast service, please rate and review this episode. If you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, please like the video, subscribe, and consider becoming one of our patrons on Patreon at patreon.com/FilmBook. Your support helps us create more engaging content. So welcome back, like I said, to another edition of The Complete Works, and today we're going to be talking about Christopher Nolan's film Tenet, which was released on September the 3rd of 2020. And, we're going to first break down a little bit of the review of the film, and I think it's really important to give you just a quick synopsis of the film. It's in the twilight world of international espionage, with an unnamed CIA operative known as protagonist, and he is recruited by this mysterious organization called Tenet to participate in a global assignment that must unfold beyond real time. This mission is to help prevent Russian, basically terrorist, starting World War III. So that's kind of a quick, dirty overview of the movie Tenet. That has a lot of really good actors and actresses that's in the film, but we'll get to that in just a few minutes. But I really wanted to start off to let you know what I thought about this film. And this is a film that, I've watched. And I got to be honest with you, I really thought really long and hard about this film. This was not something easy for me to decide one way or the other. And I'll tell you why it was a little, I'll be honest with you, why it was a little rough for me to decide is because I think there's three key takeaways from this film. One is, first of all, there's no way you can mistake this for anything other than a Christopher Nolan film, because it has the budget, and we'll talk about how much the budget is, and it was a pretty significant budget for an original screenplay, I thought. And so, first of all, only a director such as Christopher Nolan could get something like that. Second of all, this is definitely another Christopher Nolan film that you could tell because of all the twists and the turns that are in the film. And then third, to be honest with you, I felt like in a lot of cases, this was a repeat film from Christopher Nolan, because I saw a little bit of Inception in here, a little bit of The Dark Knight Rising, Memento, Dunkirk, the list goes on, and it just felt like it was a hodgepodge to me of basically every film that he had done up to Tenet in that. Now, that may be a harsh criticism of this film, because I know there's a lot of people that really enjoyed the film, but I also know that there's a lot of people that thought this was not one of Christopher Nolan's best work. And so that is kind of where I am. I'm on the fence, 50-50. But if I'm being pressed, I probably am going to find myself leaning with the group that said it was a good action-packed film, but at the same time, I just felt like I was rewatching a lot of other Christopher Nolan films, if I'm being completely honest. The other thing that kind of, I don't know if this was on purpose with Christopher Nolan, but I felt like in this film, just like we did the last film, Dunkirk, there wasn't a lot of dialogue. Now, there was more dialogue in this film than Dunkirk. I'm not trying to say that, or I wasn't trying to do a numbers count or anything like that. My point is, there was a lot of action that kind of did the speaking instead of a traditional dialogue in terms of this film. And I guess it worked to a degree. But at the same time, it's something that I completely noticed in the film. Now, is that because I just came off of watching the film Dunkirk, and that was definitely in my mind? If you listen to the last episode, that was something that was just getting repeated. And as I'm moving on through Christopher Nolan's career and film career, is that just something that stuck in my head and I couldn't shake? Possibly. I think that's a fair question that somebody could ask. But at the same time, I really thought that was something that was, in this particular film, could be lacking. Now, having said all that, I think some of the best action, or I'm sorry, not action, but some of the best parts of the film is when there's really not a lot of dialogue and the action speaks for itself. And I know you're probably saying, well, Doug, you're giving me both sides of the coin. Yes, fair enough. That's probably a fair statement. But at the end of the day, I really believe that a little bit more dialogue would have helped. And again, I do understand that I may be just a little biased on that. So fair enough in terms of that. The other thing about Tenet that I think is very interesting is, and I do appreciate this, that it wastes really no time. It really drops the viewer into the action right from the beginning, hardly missing a beat, and you really feel like you're just being thrown right into the wolves, and it starts out with a bang. The other thing that kind of bothered me a little bit about this film is that I kind of feel like there's a little bit of or too much of a James Bondish twist on the characters, that they were trying to portray or invent another 007. That was something else that was in the back of my mind. Now, again, in all fairness to the film and Christopher Nolan, I mean, we've been inundated, and I love the James Bond's 007 films, so this is not a criticism across the board. But at the same time, I really just felt like, and maybe that's something as a viewer I'm looking at as well, is that I'm constantly thinking in my mind, is this just another James Bond, and we're calling the character something else? Agent X instead of 007. Fair enough criticism on my part if you think that is a unfair advantage, but something that really kind of plays out in my mind. So here we are. We have these agents sent to retrieve some type of high profile asset during the assault, in which we only know this man as the prognostic, proving more than being capable of carrying out a blockbuster performance. The prognosticist is John David Washington, who does a wonderful job in this film carrying this out. So as you can imagine, our hero of the film, he gets captured by the enemy, he's tortured, and he has to take a capsule, and was ordered as he was ordered to do in his training. I want to make sure I say that. And as you can imagine, he survives all of this and leads to being able to save the world, mankind, from going into World War III. So the other thing is we have this mysterious partner named Neil, who is played by Robert Pattinson in the process. And he does a wonderful job, too. And I think that Robert Pattinson and John David Washington has a good chemistry together. Let me say it that way. I was going to say they did a good job, but I think the chemistry on screen works for those two, and that they do a pretty good job of having that chemistry. Now, I can say some of the best parts of the film, I think, is when the two of them are chatting, because I think that chemistry really proves itself and really comes on screen between the two of those. And that's not easy necessarily to do in an action movie. Two guys, usually it's a man and a woman, and there's some type of chemistry that's going there. This was something between, basically two agents, if you will, and I thought that they had a good chemistry on set or on the film in terms of that. That, again, like I said, is not easy to do and not something that you expect a lot in terms of that. So those are the two that's in there. I would be remiss if I didn't say that Michael Caine makes an appearance in here. That's a theme with the Christopher Nolan films. Michael Caine, he's only in there in one shot or one scene that I saw. I could have missed something else that was out there, but he's in there, and I think we have to have our cameo appearance in order for this to work. Now, there's some other individuals. Is Elizabeth Debicki, if I'm mispronouncing, I apologize, who plays Kate. She does a wonderful job in the film. I would have to say, though, I don't necessarily think that the chemistry is there, that she brings a lot of chemistry to the movie, to the movie, I would say. I think it's really between the two main characters, John David Washington and Robert Pattinson. Those are the two that really, I think, kind of steal the show in terms of that. Let me get back to a point that I had kind of made a little bit earlier when we're talking about these films, how unfortunately, in my opinion, we see a lot of the same themes or shows that kind of show up in this film, Tenet. And as you know, kind of brought me down to a negative. I didn't feel the love in this film as maybe I could have or should have, because I kept seeing some of these other films being brought back into there. Give you some examples. So there are some war action scenes in this that remind me of Dunkirk. There's an espionage narrative that really kind of feels like Inception in terms of there. There's a whole lot of people talking through mask, and that kind of reminds me of The Dark Knight Rises. And again, that seems to be a theme that, we talked about Dunkirk a little bit ago, and Tom, or in the last episode, and Tom being in the film Dunkirk and talking through a mask as a fighter pilot. To me, again, little things in the film that just kind of reminds me of previous Christopher Nolan films. And that just didn't seem fresh to me. I mean, that really bothered me in the film. And this is in no way a criticism of Christopher Nolan. I really enjoy his films. I think he's a wonderful writer, a director. But I was a little disappointed. It was almost like, I've got an idea. I don't have any new, fresh ideas to bring to it, so I'm just going to bring a little bit of everything else that I have into that. So that is my that's my thought when it comes to some of the other films of Christopher Nolan and how does it compare. In a way, I felt like I'm looking at 4 or 5 different films all crammed into one. And instead of being Dunkirk or The Dark Knight Rises or Inception or Memento or whatever the film, you name it, it's called Tenet, and I get to see a little bit of everything in there. Does it work? I suppose. But again, I'm looking for something new. I'm looking for something fresh that I would say in there. Is this film good? And I kind of alluded to that I'm 50-50. I was kind of on the fence on that. I still am on the fence with this. But like I said a little earlier in the podcast, I'm going to have to go to more of the negative side on this and really say that while I like Christopher Nolan as a writer and a director, this one just didn't do it for me. You know, this one I felt really short. In that, a lot of times, again, I keep going back to this, but we're seeing the same movie over and over again, or a series of movies of his over and over again, kind of being recycled. I didn't see that freshness in there. I think he did have 2 good leads on this film, John David Washington and Robert Pattinson. I think, again, I can't stress this enough, I really thought that their chemistry worked for the 2 of them, and that's not easily done. The other thing that kind of bothered me a little bit in this film, I love the way that music overplays sometimes some of the dialogue. I also enjoy how music is incorporated into a film, and I think it gives us a feeling or helps us set the mood. But in this film, sometimes I don't think it worked, or they were being overplayed to where I was trying to listen to the dialogue, and then I had this music in the background, and to me personally, I didn't think it worked. It actually was more confusing, and it just didn't help me or sit well with me in the process. Now, some of you may enjoyed it and maybe actually like that. But again, for me, it was a big turnoff on that, where you were having music and dialogue. Not against it. I think it's important. Huge fan of it. But in this particular film, in Tenet, I don't think it was as strong. I don't think it worked as well as it could have in terms of that. And again, so the music in the film, did it work to a degree? Yes. But I think in most cases, it was a turnoff for me. And I just don't think these worked as well or as effective as it could have, as it should have. And I was a little disappointed in that because Christopher Nolan, again, wonderful writer, wonderful director, but it just felt like he wasn't on his A game on this particular film, in my opinion. So this is something that ran 2 hours and 30 minutes. So it wasn't something that you could say, well, it was an hour and a half. It actually went 2.5 hours. And as the film went on, these negative thoughts actually got stronger for me in the process and maybe ruined, and that's a pretty strong word, but really hurt my view of this film. And I'll give you my overall prediction at the very end, as I usually do. So let's kind of shift gears a little bit, talk about production, box office success. awards, etc. As I said, it was released on September 3rd, 2020. Box office, the budget, estimated what I could find was about $205 million. It grossed in the U.S. and Canada a little over almost $58.5 million. The opening weekend in the U.S. and Canada made about $9.3 million, and it grossed worldwide $365 million in some change. So yes, it was enough to make the budget and then some, but I don't think it really had the success that I think Christopher Nolan and probably that the production company or the production company really wanted in terms of that. Was it terrible? No, not really, but it could have been a lot better in terms of that with the film that is running against the clock, if you will. Did it win any awards? It's like anything else. It did, but there wasn't anything that I'm going to sit here and say stood out to me like an Oscar nomination or picked up anything like that. We could obviously get into some of the other awards, but I like to stay at the Oscar level. That's just my own personal opinion on that. In terms of that, okay. The next thing we want to look at here real quickly is some trivia. If you've listened to this podcast before, you know that that's something that I really. I have to correct myself. I'm just looking here at my notes, and I had forgotten all about this because I was probably wrapped up into the negative of the film. That I forgot that this was a winner in the 2021 Oscar race for Best Achievement in Visual Effects. My apologies for overlooking that. Again, I was so focused on the overview of the film. The special effects, visual effects, were good. Something that I probably should have talked a little bit more about, and I apologize for that. But again, the visual effects were great, but it's not going to be enough to persuade me in terms of that. So my apologies on that. So let's go ahead and jump right into the trivia, some trivia. So the production team purchased and then crashed a real 747 airplane into a hangar. The stunt was all practical effects with no visual effects or CGI. Christopher Nolan had originally planned to use miniatures and set piece builds, however, while scouting for locations in California. The team discovered a massive array of old planes and became apparent that it would be more effective to buy a real plane of the real size and perform the sequence on a real camera. So I think that was kind of interesting there. In addition to performing stunts backwards, the main cast actually learned how to speak in reverse for the roles. And not only did they learn how to speak backwards, but they also had to do it with his characters that were in Russian accent. In terms of that, and just FYI, that in itself is what kind of reminded me of Memento, which I should have announced earlier. Robert Pattinson stated that he took inspiration of his character's accent, intonation, and mannerism from the English-American author and journalist Christopher Hitchens. Pattinson never uses his real accent when playing British characters, saying for whatever reason it feels fake to me when I'm using my own accent for a role. If I play myself on screen, I feel like a fraud, end of quote. That right there was very, very interesting to me, and I thought kind of weird that he would think using his own accent makes him feel like a fraud. For whatever reason, that really got me. and made me think, and in a way kind of laughed a little bit in terms of that, just because it was just odd for whatever reason. It struck me odd. Patterson also revealed that he did much of his own stunt driving for the film, including one particular shot where he and John David Washington were in a BMW with an IMAX camera rigged to the hood. This meant that he could scarcely see anything through the windshield, and a slight turn would result in the rig hitting the road. Ouch, that could be very dangerous. But also really enjoy seeing actors doing their own stunts, as long as they're doing it safely. And obviously, we don't want anybody to get hurt seriously or just minor hurt in terms of that. Now, after being offered the lead role of the film, John David Washington read the screenplay, and director Christopher Nolan's locked office at Warner Brothers Studios. It took him around 5 hours to finish reading it because he kept flipping back and forth in pure amazement. Remember, we said that the film is 2.5 hours long, but it took him about 5 hours to finish it, almost doubled in terms of that, which was kind of interesting. He was in amazement. I'll leave it at that. Let's see here. Although the movie is not meant to be scientifically accurate, it is based roughly on actual physics. Before filming began, Christopher Nolan had asked a physicist who he had worked previous on in Stellar to read through the screenplay to help him out with some of the concepts. Again, it feels like being recycled. I'm just going to leave it at that in terms of that. John David Washington improv'd his line, "I ordered my hot sauce an hour ago." The initial meeting between Christopher Nolan and Robert Pattinson lasted 3 hours. Pattinson explained that by the end of the meeting, he had a massive blood sugar drop because they had been talking so much and he had been concentrating so hard. He asked Nolan for a chocolate that was on the table in front of them, and then the director immediately ended the meeting. Patterson thought he had ruined his opportunity to be part in the film because of that. Again, something very interesting in terms of that. Let's see here. A lot of great information here. Christopher Nolan offered Robert Pattinson the role of Neo after watching him in Good Time from 2017 and The Lost City of Z in 2016, and he became drawn to his performances in terms of that. Let's see here. This is the 8th film with Christopher Nolan to feature Michael Caine, including his voice cameo in Dunkirk back in 2017. The working title for the film was Merry-Go-Round. There's approximately 3,500 extras involved in the opening house sequence. There are images and the things in the film that director Christopher Nolan had been thinking about at least 20 years before actually making the movie. He worked on the specifics in the film and the screenplay for roughly about 6 years. Just a couple more trivia. Again, there's so much trivia that's out there that sometimes I get caught up into this. Warner Brothers and Sci-Cop logos are shaded red and blue, respectively. These are the colors used in the film to represent normal and invert time. The original schedule of this film was to be released on July 17, 2020, a lucky date for Christopher Nolan. However, with the pandemic of COVID, the release was postponed several times, and Warner Brothers eventually decided to release the movie internationally on August the 26th before it was debuted here in the United States on September the 3rd. Though screening in America was shown beginning August 30th. In terms of that. Let's see here. We'll give you just a couple more here, and it's the first major studio film to be released in the theaters during COVID-19. And the last thing I'll just say is a terminal at Los Angeles International Airport stood in for the Osoli Airport Terminal in that film, Tenet. Again, tons of information here when it comes to trivia. I don't want to use up all of our time just talking about trivia, but just enough to hopefully tease you and let you know a little bit about that. So what is my overall thought of the film? You know, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being outstanding, or 1 being terrible and 10 being outstanding, I'm going to give it a 5. I think it was a good film in certain ways. But again, my negative of seeing the same thing over and over again in some of the Christopher Nolan films really leads me to put this no better than a 5. I wish I could give it higher. Again, there's nothing against Christopher Nolan as a writer and director. He's top-notch. But overall, at the end of the day, I have to say that that's really how I feel. I give it a 5 out of 10, and give it 50% at its best. So, thank you for listening to this episode of the Complete Works Podcast. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe for future episodes. You'll find the Film Book on all major social media networks, so give us a follow. You can find more of my work on FilmBook's official website, which is film-book.com. You can just search for Doug Hess or The Complete Works. You can also find me on Twitter or Instagram at HessDoug14. Tune in next time when I review and analyze the next Christopher Nolan film. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to The Complete Works. Find more of The Complete Works on FilmBook, on your favorite podcast service, and on YouTube.